Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm your host, Anna Heslop, and today my guest is FAR's Technology Manager, Chris Smith.
Hi Anna, how are you today?
Good. Okay, so Chris, we're talking to Chris because he organised the recent series of combine harvester setup events, and we're going to talk about the feedback from that. And from what I've heard, a lot of growers out there have made some adjustments to their machines, and they've been getting really good results over harvest. So firstly, Chris, tell us about this team of Australians that came and told us how to do it.
Yeah, so we had 4 people over. Firstly, it was Pete Broley. He was actually sort of instigating it all. He managed to get the guys together. He's the CEO of Primary Sales, so he sells aftermarket products and things, but his enthusiasm goes beyond that. He's actually about getting best productivity for the growers. And then we had a John Deere specialist. He was Cassie van der Westhausen. He sort of basically, his background was he's been working with combines since 2000-ish. We'd worked 5 years with Case, then went to 10 years with John Deere, then went out alone where he's got his own company where he supports different combines around Australia. And he's been running workshops for farmers and for actual technicians as well, combine technicians from that time. So he's sort of got a lot of experience with that and seen a lot of different machines. Then we had Brett Asper. He was the CAS and also the Case guy. He's got 30 years experience as being an independent sort of technologist with sort of combines. Like I say, his main area was the Case, but he also looked after the CAS for us. He's done a lot of work in that area. And so he's brought loads of expertise. And then we had Murray Skaman, who came from Canada rather than Australia. He was the combine expert for the New Holland. He'd been working with New Hollands for 20 plus years. He's actually doing quite a lot of work with them now. They've brought in a new machine into the market, and he's actually been tasked with getting that performing in Canada. And he's done about 500 of these workshops across the world. And he sort of worked in North America a lot. And he's also he runs these workshops for the technicians for the companies as well. So he actually trains the guys for New Holland and that sort of stuff. So it's a real caliber of sort of expertise coming over. They might not have known our crops, but they know the machines inside out, which is probably what the main thing that came from the whole thing.
Okay, so they were here twice. Do you want to give us a quick summary of why they needed to visit twice? And then we'll get on to a little bit more detail of what they were actually doing during those trips.
Yeah, so they came first time was just a general workshop. So we did one workshop down in Southland at the Knapdale site, and we had about 40 or 50 growers there. We had class combines there and also a Case combine and also John Deere. And they basically, that one was just basically, it was running through the whole flow of the machine. And they just wanted to give people an overview of what they could do and what the machine's potential was and what the potential losses were and how to increase your performance. That was probably the main goal. There was actually those workshops. The second ones that followed on were actually more of an individual one-on-one type thing. So yeah, we went to Knapdale. Then the day after Aria, we did one at Chertsey. We had about 80 growers there. We had budgeted on about 50, but we had 80 and probably more wanted to come. So apologies to those who couldn't get in, but we sort of tried to fit as many people as we could in. And then we went to Timaru down to Andrew Darling's and ran a third one down there on the 1st of December. And it was basically just giving people a complete run through. So it started off running through where the machine losses were. So they start from the front of the machine, work all the way through as a generic every type of machine. And then they broke up into different groups, and then we had the different specialists who would talk specifically about the sort of idiosyncrasies of each of those different machines. And then at the end of it, they spoke about the fronts and the losses and things from there and how to cut the losses. So a lot of the growers didn't come to the second part, but they went to the first part and they got a lot of information out of that. And actually, because what we were trying to get people to do was take 1 point home and actually do something on farm from that. So they actually sort of, a lot of guys did actually do that, which is quite interesting.
So that really interests me because I was a little bit skeptical. I thought, hey, hang on. We've got growers here they know their machines. They've been on farm for 20, 30, 40 years. And how do they not know how to adjust their machines properly for harvest? So did you find people were a bit sceptical when they got there?
Absolutely. I mean, and what are these Aussies coming telling us how to do New Zealand crops? It was definitely a two-way street. The farmers were giving their experience and the guys was giving their experience. Let's say the guys knew the machines, but they don't know the crop conditions, and half the crops we grow in this country, the amount of times had to stop and they had to take pictures, and they're walking through carrot paddocks going, wow, look at this, but they knew the mechanisms behind the combines and how it would be able to deal with that sort of stuff. But the growers were quite skeptical to start with. But it's the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. And so what they thought they knew, and a lot of people were doing, I mean, we weren't there to say, oh, you're not doing it right. It was basically, how can we improve? How can we sort of measure your losses? How can we increase your performance? It was definitely a two-way street. And even the dealers as well, they came on board and they were giving their experience as well. So it was a real sort of feedback. And it's more a process of just getting everyone talking about it, because it's something that people don't generally talk about. They just get into their combines, they do their own bit, they might talk to a couple of growers, but to have that many people there being able to talk about it together was awesome, really. It was a really good feedback.
Okay, so the first workshop was general, everybody looking at how machines of every colour, what they looked like, and you could go and then the second ones were more one-on-one. The aim of the game was to improve harvest efficiency, whether that was speed in the paddock or reducing losses or both.
Yeah.
So what have the growers found?
Yeah, so after the first one, we actually did a questionnaire and said, do you want to visit? And so we tried to approach and try and go to see as many growers as we could afterwards. So apologies again to those we couldn't get to see, but there were literally hundreds of people wanted to see us, so we tried to get people there. So what we found was, if we check the losses, and if the losses were good, we'd say, okay, you're happy with your losses. What about your speed? Try and increase your speed and see what happens to your losses. And so a lot of the growers, for example, we had one, we went to see Craig Whiteside. We got down to Southland on the second visits, spent a couple of hours with him, looked at his combine. Murray went through his combine with him, made some adjustments, and then it rained for about 3 days. So that was a bit of a dilemma, but we sort of ran through what he could do. And after that, Craig was saying he's given us some feedback. He said he's increased his productivity by about 30%, which is colossal. He's sort of he's happy with his losses before we got there, but he's made a few changes to his concaves and he's pushed it a bit because he wasn't going fast enough. And he's now realised, because he's actually measuring what's coming out the back, that he can push it more. So he thinks this harvest, he might have taken 70 hours off his harvest if it follows through with his productivity that is increased. And
when it keeps raining, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal down there, especially I just come back from there now, and the guys, they had a beautiful day of sun. And then on Wednesday and Thursday it rained, and that's what their season's been like. And then we saw Paul Johnson as well, another case. He was a case guy. He said before he went to the workshops, before the one-on-one happened, he actually made all the changes they told him at the workshops. He went to his dealer, Cochrane's, and bought all the different parts they told him to buy. And he actually sort of put them on his combine. And he said he's gone from 20 hectares a day on his barley up to 30, 35 hectares a day. So he's increased his output by 50%. And so his biggest issue now is, his biggest gripe is now he can't keep up with the corn carts and everything else, because his productivity in his combines come through. So another one, Brent Austin was another one. He made the changes after the first workshop as well. And he said he's increased his tonnage by 10 to 15 tonnes an hour. He was looking at changing his machine, but now he's got the productivity out of his current machine. He's going to stick with that. Yeah.
So you're talking a lot about losses.
Yes.
How are growers measuring losses?
That's a really good point. There's many ways to do it, but you've got to do it. I mean, some guys just have a mat. What we were using grain pans that attach to the bottom of the combine and the back axle, and then you press the button and they fall out, and then you either measure the losses out of the sieves or through the straw off the rotors, etc. So there's different systems out there. We were using one called the Bushel Plus, but there's many different types. But what you need to do is you need to have a look at the what's actually in the tray. And then it's probably more the mathematics side of things to quantify what that works out as in dollars per hectare, etc. So you have to put in what your yield is, how wide your cut is, how far you're spreading the chaff, how far you're spreading the straw if you're chopping it, etc. Put where you put the pan, and then you work out from that what your cost per hectare is, of what your losses are. And that's what people have been coming back to me saying. Now they actually can quantify the losses. They can actually see. We had another grower, I won't mention his name, but he was struggling in his ryegrass, trying to thrash the seed from the straw, and he just couldn't get it working. And he's worked out from his pan, he was losing $500 a hectare at the back, and he thought he was going to have to stop. And he just tried one more thing. He just tried increasing his rotor speed, and then he got his losses from 6% down to 1.3%, and that equated to down to $100 a hectare. And he said, well, he wanted to get the crop in. He was happy to lose $100 a hectare at the back, so he carried on. But when he was losing 500, he was either going to stop if that change hadn't made. So it's a really important decision tool. And it's just quantifying, knowing the size of the pan, and then working that back to actually what your losses are, because you can put your hand on the ground and say there's 3 pickles underneath, but you don't know whether they were there before the combine went over or before, etc. So by putting a pan down, anything that's underneath the pan was already there. And you can also see what the losses are off the front. You can put the pans underneath to see what's coming off the rotors, or at the side to see what's coming off the chaff spreaders and that sort of stuff. So you can see where your losses are as well. So it's really valuable.
You looked at all the different combine brands, header brands. And so are they all, as you say, they all have their own idiosyncrasies, and some will work different ways than others. But what were some key messages, standard things that would go across the board, whatever you're using?
Yeah, what was very apparent is, whether it be from the time they bought the combine or just from the fact that the work the combine's been doing, that you need to measure the actual concaves and your thrashing mechanisms to make sure they're all square and level. So, I mean, whether they're level side from side, so one side might be, say, 2 or 3 mils above the other side. So you'll be sort of not thrashing as hard on that side and thrashing too hard on the other side. Or it might be a front to back on the concaves where it might not be even. So you might be sort of letting more in one at the front and not being able to get out the back. So it's sort of getting it square. And pretty much most machines actually need adjustment on that. I mean, 2 mils difference can equate to 5 tons an hour output difference. So it's a big difference. And that's fuel savings. That's hours in a day you can actually do. There's Paul Johnson, like I say, he said he was doing sort of 20 hectares up to 30 hectares a day, and his engine load went from 80% down to 70%, and they were able to combine in the day rather than having to struggle into night when the conditions weren't as good. So it's just the knock-on effects of all that sort of stuff. So it's knowing that. And also, if you're measuring losses out the back, don't be afraid to try something that goes against your logic. It's like a lot of people, if they were seeing straw, grain in the straw, they were thinking, I need to close the concave up, it's not thrashing it out. But what it was actually they needed to open it because the grain was already free, but it wouldn't actually let it get out because everything was too tight. So they had to open it up and just let the grain come through and separate out properly. So it's trying these different things. But yeah, and looking at your sieves as well. We had one grower whose one side of his sieves were 2 mils further open than the other side, and it's just making sure everything's square, everything's working as it's meant to be. Everything's when you sieves say there's 6 mils open, making sure there's 6 mils open and they're open on the same side, and just directing the wind in the right directions and that sort of stuff.
2 mils just sounds like nothing, doesn't it?
It does, and you think 5 tons. I mean, that's a ballpark figure. It's not going to be the same for everything, but yeah, 5 tons an hour output difference. And some of these machines were 6 mils out, things like that. So you're like 10, 15 tons an hour change just by purely setting up the machine squarely without doing anything else.
And that's just using a spirit level? How do we do that?
So that's there's different ways of doing it for the different machines. But yeah, it's just measuring the drum and the concaves and looking at the distances between them. There is actually Brett's put a sheet together for the case machines. And if the people that have got YouTube, they look at Murray Skellen combine setup. He goes through the whole thing on that on a YouTube channel, and also DRGC have actually got some YouTube stuff from the guys talking about it as well. But yeah, it's measuring the distances yourself, and you can get tools to do it, but just you have to get in the machine. And it's something you can do is you can get your dealer to do it for you as a pre-harvest sort of check, as it were, when they're doing the rest of the machine. Get them to check it because they do go out of line, and it can make a huge difference.
So most of the growers that you saw when you went back, so they'd come to the first workshop and then you saw them during harvest.
Yeah.
Had they made those changes themselves by the time you got there, or were they waiting for you and the team to come along and show them what to do?
No, some of them had just completely done the whole lot themselves already, and they're already seeing the input, so the gains from it. But some of them were doing it as we were there, and it's like Craig had a good idea what he was doing already, and we were just showing him how to use the pan correctly, and Murray was saying pulling out wires and things, and it's just giving them the sort of the confidence to actually try some of these things. And like I say, if it doesn't work, change back to what it was. Just change one thing at a time. Don't do everything at once. If you make one change, see what your losses are at the back, whether you can increase your speed, etc. Just do one thing at a time. And if you do change things, one of the guys told me, he said the best thing to do if you are changing something is change it to the extreme and then bring it back. Because if you change things in small increments, you won't see when you hit that sweet spot. You can quite easily miss it, but go extreme and work your way back to get to the sweet spot, which is quite good tip as well.
Okay, so you've had some feedback. What's the process for finding out how people have got on?
Yeah, so if people can get back to me, the more information I can get, the more we can sort of look at sort of trying to run more of these workshops, and just I want the stories, good and bad, what's worked, what hasn't worked from all the growers. So if they can get in touch with me at FAR, that'd be awesome, and we can get as much feedback as possible. Like I say, I want to hear good and bad, so don't just tell us the good stuff. If somebody says, oh, it's a load of rubbish, it hasn't worked, I want to know why, what hasn't worked, and then we can look at what we can do to improve it, or on the field days as well, just give us some more feedback on what they thought and what they would like to have done, what they would like the guys to have covered more of, just so we can improve it moving forward.
And then, so as the next step, you're developing a bit of a database on what people are doing with regards to combine settings.
Yes, what we thought was, after talking to everybody, the settings in the manuals they're very generic, and so we've got so many different crops over here. So what I thought with talking to the guys was, if we could actually get screenshots when the growers are actually combining, of what the settings are off their screen display, and then if they can let me know what machine it was, whether it was a small tube rotor, big tube rotor, whether the weather was like, humidity, the grain moisture, whether they were cutting sort of high or low. If I can get all that sort of information for the crops they were growing, then we can actually make a New Zealand database where it won't be right for every crop, but it'll give you somewhere to start, and then you can work from that point and tweak, so you'll be closer to where your target sort of optimum level will be to start with. So, and that's another thing, if they can email or just text me the pictures, etc. I'm trying to get some of that data together. I mean, I've got some growers. I had one guy who's actually I went round to see him, and he said, I've got my settings for the last 3 years in a book. So I've just taken pictures of all those from him. And it'll be anonymous. We won't sort of say, oh, this is so-and-so's settings. So we'll put them together. And if we can get enough information that's useful, we can then put it together as a FAR sort of database.
So how do you know from that data, though, that they were optimal settings?
We'll need to know the losses as well. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to know what the losses were, what the yields were, etc. And don't send them through if you think, oh, these settings are completely rubbish. Here they are. If once you think you've hit your sweet spot and you've got your losses less than 2% or 1.5%, then send them through, and we can sort of work with those.
And so there'll be people up in the North Island saying, hang on, hang on. You had people over and you did all these workshops in Canterbury and Southland. What about us? Is there a plan for North Island growers?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, this was a prototype. We didn't want to go over the whole country and find out it wasn't working, but it's been so successful, we'll definitely be coming up to the North Island. So any growers in certain areas, get in touch with me, and I'm going to be trying to plan where we're going to go up to the North Island. So any feedback from the North Island growers would be much appreciated. And they, like I say, they can. We didn't see them, but they can look on YouTube at what Murray's been going through and what the guys have been going through, so they can take some learnings away from that as well. But yeah, we're going to go and see them and other parts of the South Island as well, hopefully next year.
Thanks very much, Chris. So we'll make sure that those links for those YouTube videos somewhere that you can find them, and we'll keep pushing information out via our website, social media, and from the ground up. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, no problem.
And for you guys, have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.